I listened to the previous session as it went on, and the issues which were coming up were quite pertinent to what we are going to be discussing this afternoon. And the question which maybe I would want to ask each one of us, even as we engage in the discussion, is, do we really know what we understand by innovation? As everybody speaks about innovation, depending on where you are coming from, depending on whether you are an expert in innovation, do we really understand what is innovation? If you ask me what is innovation, I'll give you an answer which relates to where I'm coming from. Somebody else would relate to where they are coming from or what they are passionate about. So this afternoon, we are going to be discussing about issues to do with, do we need to build capacity on innovation, and in particular, innovation that relates to African context. This is what we are going to be discussing this afternoon. And we have a team of a panel of experts who are going to help us to discuss this particular topic. We have Diran, who is coming from South Africa. They'll mention what they do and what they are coming from. We have Professor Mamo Muchi, coming also from South Africa, but also doing a lot of work on innovation in Africa. We have Gessi. I think we have listened to Gessi. I think yesterday she spoke in one of the sessions. And we have myself, who is going to be moderating this session. So to start us off, I would want to say that this session is convened by Africarix, and most of you maybe who are seated here, you know who Africarix is. It's a network of innovation scholars who are interested in pursuing innovation and capacity building relevant to Africa. And this particular network has been undertaking quite a number of activities to build capacity on innovation and development in Africa, but in a very small scale. So we'll be speaking about what Africarix is doing at the end of the discussion. So I would want to invite the first speaker, is going to be Diran. I'll give you about 6 to 7 minutes. Please make sure you stick to a timing, because we need to engage the audience in a discussion after this. I would like you to explain to the audience here, what do we mean by innovation? And do we really require to undertake innovation studies? And in innovation studies, are they different from business studies? Or are they different from entrepreneurship studies? What is the difference between innovation studies and other areas that people are accustomed to? And I would also want you to reflect your reflection on innovation studies in relation to Africa. You have 6 minutes to share your contribution on this particular topic. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Anne, and good evening to everyone. Good afternoon. All right, so I teach innovation studies at Wits University, Wits Business School in Johannesburg, and the way we understand it is innovation studies is shorthand for innovation policy and management. And the way that program is constructed is that because we sit at a business school, we need to study firm-level innovation, and that's what they tend to call strategic management of innovation. But because the innovation system, the policy environment is not sufficiently robust or experimented enough, we say that the institutions and the firms are co-evolving. And if that's true, then the students who study the strategic management of innovation don't know anything about what the policy environment could offer them in terms of incubation support, in terms of subsidies, in terms of, and likewise, if you train innovation policy people, those who will manage innovation at the policy level, if they have no idea what firms in an African context actually go through and struggle with, then what kinds of policies are they designing? So that was kind of the idea of, I was not the one who developed the program. Other people developed the program. I think Professor Muchi was involved and other people. And so that was to bring innovation practitioners in the policy space together with innovation practitioners in the private sector to study together, learn the same concepts or similar concepts, challenge each other, so that when they go out into the world of practice, they have a shared understanding, a shared set of meanings around what it is that managing innovation is about. Now, I should say this. People always come up to me and say, you teach innovation, what is that? I said, no, I don't teach innovation. I teach innovation management, right? So people innovate every day because they need to come up with solutions to their problems. We cannot teach that. No one can teach that. People have creativity, people have competences, and so there are too many innovations, quote unquote, that in the world for us to be teaching innovation. So I don't do that. I teach innovation management. But of course, that implies some understanding of what innovation is. And that's essentially, in my view, bringing to bear new ways of doing things, new products, new services, new business models, new institutional forms, with the goal to achieve a certain outcome, an outcome that improves the livelihoods of people. So narrowly speaking, in the business school context, it's about profits and growth, but of course you can have profits and you can have growth, and those can coexist with income inequality and poverty and environmental degradation and so on and so forth. So I don't want to be too prescriptive about what those outcomes are. They should be beneficial to a particular society, and they should not affect other people adversely. So there's a kind of justice component to that. So at the business school, there's also a Master of Management in Entrepreneurship. And I also teach a course on that program called Technology and High Growth Entrepreneurship. So I direct the master's program in innovation studies, and I teach a single course on the entrepreneurship program where I'm under pressure to explain to the students, well, what's the difference between innovation and entrepreneurship? And so that we have to do like the first session just on that. In entrepreneurship studies, they have a concept called entrepreneurial orientation. What is it in the makeup of an entrepreneur or an entrepreneurial firm that makes them competitive and effective? And they, in one model, they have three components. One is innovativeness, one is proactiveness. So innovativeness is how well you acquire new knowledge, mainly science and technology based, to improve your products and services or develop new ones. Proactiveness is how well you seek out new avenues for creating businesses and so on and so forth, and diffusing those products. And risk-taking is, your ability just to take risks, your own livelihood, your salary, your family situation, and so on. So the range of capabilities that an entrepreneur has to have in order to, one, create a new venture, to achieve scale, are different from what the innovator, strictly speaking, needs to have. The innovator just needs to come up with something new that is useful to someone else other than himself or herself. So if you come up with an invention and you patent it and you license it, and someone else is doing whatever they're doing with it and they're paying you royalties, 5% or 10%, you're an innovator, but you have no idea how to start a new firm, how to achieve scale, and so on. So innovation is a subset of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship then being a broader range of capabilities that include innovation. So we talk about innovation-driven entrepreneurship, meaning the kind of entrepreneurship that leverages new knowledge more than it leverages the risk-taking ability and proactiveness and so on. So that's kind of the way we make the distinction. So to touch on what does innovation studies mean in the African context, that's important. It's a relatively new field generally. We have leading scholars in our field, many from the West, Europe, but progressive, challenging, neoclassical orthodoxy and so on. So they've given us a set of concepts and tools that are very rich and useful, and that we can apply judiciously in our environments to try and, first of all, map out innovation activities and figure out better ways to develop policies and formulate strategies around them. But I think that because the contexts are so different, and this innovation comes out of an evolutionary understanding of economics. So if it's evolutionary, it's basically historically based. Is what happened, what did we do next, what did this country do next? And so if every country kind of shapes its own responses to economic development, then how realistic is it to simply take tools in an acontextual manner? So we need, while we really appreciate those tools, we need to be more critical, right, in the way that we use them and so on and so forth. And that's what teaching innovation studies in the African context implies. We also need, then this will be my last point, a more robust set of historical reference points. Yes, the innovation studies community, strictly speaking, is new, so people like Professor Calestos Juma, rest in peace, or Professor Mamamuchi, or Oyebanji, or Yelaron are still very much alive and still very much active, and they're sort of the founding African scholars in innovation studies. So that's how new it is, but it doesn't mean that no one before them had thought about the role of science and technology in development, in economic development, in solving livelihood issues, and so on and so forth. So who are some of those others? Scholars, thinkers, practitioners who have commented on that 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. So we need our own historical tradition that then fits into what the modern innovation studies field is doing. So those are some of the opportunities but challenges as I see them in terms of building capacity for innovation management, both in the public sector and the private sector.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You have alluded to quite a number of things that perhaps anybody who is interested in undertaking research in innovation and development that is targeted to Africa, there are a few considerations that they need to make sure that they include in their research methodology. And the reason why maybe we can argue that there are some specific tools that work for Africa, or there are specific tools that work for developed countries, which we may want to think about here. And the reason why we want to hear Mamamuchi tell us something about a concept which has been perhaps used by quite a number of researchers. It's actually being used by even policymakers now. I wonder whether they do even understand what it means, innovation system. So Mamo is going to briefly tell us what innovation system concept is all about and how relevant it is in undertaking innovation studies, in particularly in the context of Africa. But we would like him to also tell us whether is innovation system, applicable in all contexts, or do we need to adapt it to African context? So Mamo, 5 minutes, but we would like you to also, tweak your response to, what we are discussing today on innovation and innovation capacity building that is relevant to stakeholders in Africa. Okay. Just 5 minutes, Mamo.
Okay, thank you very much. 5 minutes is too little, but let me just thank the African Innovation Summit organizers, our brother Olebenga, my Geshi, and others, for working very hard, and Erica, all of you working very hard to change the language about Africa. Africa is always described as failure speak, hopeless, failure, this. Now a new language is coming, innovation speak. Now, today, the whole time, I'm hearing innovators. And it's so spiritually energizing to hear this. So I'm really happy that we are moving in a new direction. So now we need to actually realize this innovative Africa, Green Africa, Smart Africa, Creative Africa. I think we need to move on now, make a huge paradigm shift. You asked me an important question. We, in Africa, when we decolonized, there was a new theory that was called development economics, development. So development theory came, and now it's 70 years old. Then innovation system came 40 years ago. Now it's about 40 years since it became promoted very well, and it was promoted by people that I am involved with. My former supervisor was one of the founders. His name is Chris Freeman. He's left, a very nice man. He used to say, Africa, the imperial builders projected, will always be the cornerstone of the arch. Mama, trust me, Africa will rise, he used to say. He was a very nice, he's English, but very nice man. So we had that. Now we have 40 years. Exactly the issue is the development economics something we were involved in? And is it contextualized in our Africa? Or is it talked about? Let me just give you a concrete example. For example, economic growth and economic development. Economic development, when Amartya Sen came, he said there's deficiency because some people mistake growth with development. He actually made a big contribution by saying, how do we create capability and functioning? What matters is not what people earn. What matters is how they are capable and how it makes them function better in life. Their well-being matters more than anything else. That's what he said. So he actually changed the whole development concept into something more meaningful in terms of well-being subtraction or well-being addition, well-being multiplication, well-being division. This kind of human well-being became central. But some of us still talk about now, remember the McKinsey Global Institute or others, when they talk the African Lions Rising, they always talk about economic growth, just very technically and just economically, not in terms of this wider thing of the capability and functioning. Anna was asking me, I must say something about capability, so I thought about this, very important. Now, the interesting question now is, we came with the idea with some friends in Europe that we should add innovation to development too, to capability and functioning. How do we also generate innovative dynamics included in this well-being multiplication rather than subtraction, not just economic growth, but economic development? How do we bring that about? We had this issue, then we added what we call the Global X Network. Capability was one of them, learning, competence building. We talked about it. How do we actually valorize functioning, competence building by adding learning, knowledge, education, inquiry, problem solving, all these very creative, innovative, inventive capabilities and acumens. How do we do that is how we came to this Global X Network, which now is the Africa X Network that Anna is leading. Now, the most interesting thing is this now. We need to think about Africa. What are our issues? What are our problems? For example, in the earlier session, they were talking about financing innovation. And the issue they talked about is not financing innovation. If it was financing innovation, it should have been about how much R&D you spend, whether the R&D is functioning, or those kinds of things that we should have discussed about. That's not what they discussed about. What they discussed about is innovation to manage our finances. And then they talked about cryptocurrency and bitcoins and all these new online things that we do. The problem they should have addressed is how are our finances, Africa's finances, currently managed? In the financial crisis, can I just tell you, we don't control our finance. Our finance, every day probably, the currency where she comes from goes down. The currency where when I went to South Africa, it was 1 pound was about 5 rand. Now it's about 20 rand. When I try to send money to my children, my salary has gone down. I'm just telling you, who controls these finances is very, very important. Can I just tell you, something like 65% of the reserves of the so-called Francophone countries, I don't like to call Africa Francophone. Africa is not a phone, Africa is philia. But what they call us, 65% is controlled by the French bank, treasury. The inflation rate is determined by France. France says, unless I control it, your money will go down. But the money still goes down. So it's a very complicated situation we are in. We need to create a different mechanism where we even use, when we do this technology, we make our finance function better. And we become capable and manage it better. Our innovation should be to do that. Now, how do we create an innovation system in Africa that can actually articulate and really help us build this? Is a very interesting issue. I'm now thinking that we need to think of how we can get all these policymakers to work together in such a way that they can be innovative in the sense with the finance sector, all the finance ministers must, on every sphere, on the infrastructure, on everything, so that we can actually integrate Africa better, control it better, deal with the world and respond to it, at the same time find a way by which we circulate our goods. We could have a dual currency or something like that. Some new innovative networking thought. A networked system of innovation kind is what I'm thinking now. It's a new one. I'll come back with this more in the discussion, but we need to create a new innovation dynamics entirely driven by our own reality, by our own context, by our own wish and desire and vision to make sure our people are totally capable, are functioning, and no one starves, no one begs, no one is shelterless. No African should be, we are too rich. We should not be in this mess. I'm not happy about that. Let's hope that we do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mamo. I think he's opening up the discussion in a way that people can now start thinking about the complexity of innovation. And you can imagine if a system is complex, then how do you study that particular system, which is very complex? So we'll be coming to that in the discussion, but he's alluded to the fact that we need to look at innovation from a system perspective. He has also alluded to the fact that we have multiple actors who are involved in that particular system, and they need to be brought on board, not just the financial actors. There are many, many actors who are involved in that particular system, and we need to think about them when we are discussing about building capacity on innovation, particularly in the context of Africa. And to help us to discuss about how to do this, I would invite Erica to, first of all, before we get to the real question, Erica, do you think that capacity on innovation should be built for everybody who is involved, not just policymakers, not just academics? Do you think even the innovators themselves need to have their capacity built on the understanding around innovation and development, particularly in the context of Africa? Do you think we need to build capacity for the informal sector, for instance, because our economy in Africa is actually, the main actors are informal actors. Do you think we need to build capacity for informal sector? Do we need to build capacity even for the youth who are becoming, increasingly becoming interested in innovation? So who should be targeted for innovation capacity building? That's the first question before we come to the other question for you.
Just very, very briefly, thanks, Anna, for the opportunity to be in this panel. But for me, capacity building is a very broad concept. So I don't know, I see capacity building as something that can be very hands-on, not necessarily teaching and learning something in a classroom. I think there are different avenues and different modes of capacity building, and for some of the actors, like the ones that you've described, the informal economy, entrepreneurs, and so on, some of the methods for capacity building can be very much learning by doing and emphasizing the importance of hands-on learning, just by allowing those actors to put themselves in particular situations when they interact with academics, with researchers, with intermediary organizations that can facilitate the particular type of capacities that need to be built. and the skills that need to be built, which are not the same across the board. So I definitely don't believe in a one-size-fits-all approach where we say, okay, building capacity means this, this, and this. I think it has to be very tailored to the needs of different actors in the system.
Thank you. I would want you now to reflect on considering that we need to look at this concept of competence building and capability buildings from, the context in which we find ourselves in. The aspect of collaboration becomes very critical here. The aspect of coordination, the aspect of cooperation becomes very critical here. Do you want to briefly talk about how do we strengthen collaborations that are focusing, that are targeted to competence building and collaboration, particularly in the context of Africa, where we have realized that we really need to involve quite a number of actors, and we have realized that we have issues that are contextually, Africa in nature. So how do you see collaboration and cooperations and, partnerships, enhancing this agenda of building innovation and capacity, innovation and development capacity building in Africa?
No, collaboration is essential, and maybe I won't be able to speak about all the different types of collaborations that I think. When we talk about a system, we are talking about those arrows that connect the dots, right? We're talking about the interactions, the collaborations, the partnerships. That is what makes the system. Otherwise, you have isolated actors doing their own thing. So the moment that we conceive innovation as something that happens in a system, inevitably we're talking about collaborations and cooperations and partnerships of different types and kinds. But perhaps what I would like to talk a little bit about is collaborations that happen in the ambit of research, and I think AfricaLeaks is quite active in that particular area, even though you also have collaborations supported from academia to policymakers. So there are different dimensions that are covered by AfricaLeaks, but I think since AfricaLeaks is very active in supporting collaborations across countries, across research teams and so on, and from my own experience with AfricaLeaks, I'd like to share maybe a few thoughts about that. One of the most effective ways of collaboration from my point of view that I've experienced under AfricaLeaks is having collaborative research projects. Having this, you meet people in meetings and you say, yes, we have to do something together. Yes, of course, I will send you an email, I'll give you a call. Things don't necessarily happen. But when you have to define problems together, you have to define research questions, you have to comply with a set of deadlines and targets. I think that really is what brings people together in terms of thinking and developing not only new academic knowledge, intellectual knowledge, but something that relates to capacity building is a lot of the value of research collaboration comes from the operationalization of these projects. So you learn a lot about research ethics in different institutions. How do different institutions deal with that? Project management, involving your younger researchers, your research assistants in that collaboration and exposing them to the field. And I think it's a very part of the side effects of research collaboration. I think they constitute a lot of the most valuable outcomes of it. And in this respect, I want to say that there are a number of limitations to it. So even though saying, yes, everybody should collaborate together, obviously funding is an issue. I've been lucky enough to be involved in a number of projects where funding was provided for collaborations among almost exclusively African scholars. But usually you find funding opportunities in situations where the questions have been defined elsewhere. And African researchers come as partners at a later stage of the project. And I think obviously, even though the side effects of the collaboration are still there, I think engaging the African research community into defining the issues and the thematic areas that need to be looked at is critical. So engaging more collaboration across African countries, I think, is essential. Another thing that is a challenge is the issue of interdisciplinarity. We like to say, yes, different disciplines have to collaborate together, but in practice, I mean, it's extremely difficult to have a natural scientist and a social scientist defining a problem in the same way, agreeing on a methodology and taking that project forward is extremely difficult in practice, but very, very necessary if we want to address the complexity and the multidimensional and overlayer African challenge context. So, and then finally, just I want to make a last final point. It's about another difficulty is that we have a very scattered community of scholars in the continent. We have some units that are training new scholars and building capacity here and there, but we are all very spread and we need to reinforce those bridges between us. Usually the bridges take us elsewhere, sometimes outside the continent, which are very useful and extremely beneficial, but we also have to look at each other and build bridges within the continent in such a situation where all of us are scattered.
We'll come back to the question of partnerships and collaboration because it's very critical for Africans because we need to partner. But how we partner, I think it's very critical to agree upfront how we partner because increasingly we are realizing that we need to have collaborations which are African researchers, led rather than non-African. I think that was a discussion which was going on here yesterday. So we need African researchers to actually drive, these particular, types of competence building. So we'll be coming back to that during the discussion. But Erica has alluded to something which I think is very critical, and we need to think about that. What does partnership bring? What do collaborations bring on board? Besides just the human capacity, they bring resources which are financial in nature. So the issue of resources is quite critical for when you are building competencies and capabilities which are focusing on our issues here in Africa. So I would request Gesi to focus a little bit about how can we leverage resources for this particular purpose, for innovation and competence building, particularly in Africa. And how can we ensure that, the ROCOs, localized, funds, private sector in Africa, actors in Africa, they drive this particular, agenda of innovation capacity building. So, Gesi, maybe you can help us to unpack that particular issue around how do we leverage resources for us to be able to undertake, capacity building in innovation and development in Africa. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. And I think Erica gave a really good lead into that by raising this point about where the money comes from and what behaviors that might lead. I thought I would, because Anna asked me to talk about this and I worried people might think I know where the money is and I don't really. But I have some experiences and I thought I could share that by way of beginning to respond to this question, maybe by giving two examples. One example was when a number of years ago, and I'm based in South Africa, but I come originally from Kenya, and I thought it would be a good idea to have some cooperation because knowing both contexts, I could see some very clear opportunities for research collaboration, innovation collaboration between the two contexts. We got the ministries talking to each other, and we said, let's do something. To cut a long story short, what really surprised me was that while there was quite a high level of enthusiasm from the scholars on both sides to do this, and even from the policy people, the government officials on both sides, immediately the question everybody began to ask was, where is the money coming from? And immediately the assumption was that South Africa is where the money should come from because South Africa is rich and Kenya, I don't know what Kenya is. I think this is problematic, and I think there's something in our thinking in terms of what is the purpose of financing. In architecture we say form follows function. Perhaps we also need to say finance also needs to follow function. You can't start a conversation about money when we're not even talking about what do we want to do anyway. And in fact, maybe if we figured out what we were doing, the appropriate modes of financing might become evident, and we could then pursue them. And it's not an issue of, well, we'll only come to the meetings if we know where the money is coming from. And it's almost as though the money is the agenda and not the work. Let me give you a different example. I've been working for the last few years at a place called South African Cities Network, which is really in the public policy, it's the public space, it's a public sector linked body, although it's a not for profit. But what's interesting about it is that in 2000, the year 2000, when South Africa's current system of local government was created, there was a recognition that capability had to be built. Because you now had people who had never run municipalities and had never run cities. Now you've got somebody running Cape Town who's never run a city or a municipality or anything like that before in their lives. You've got somebody running Johannesburg, one of the most, well, I would say an important city, not only in South Africa, but on the continent. And now you've got somebody running it who's never ever run anything of the sort before. Maybe never even run a company. Now you're running a city. And the question was, how do you do that? It was an issue of innovation. It was an issue of needing to build capability and fast, but it was also a need to learn because others had done it. The fact that you hadn't done it doesn't mean nobody's ever done it before. Now, what they did was to create Cities Network, and what I want to speak to is the funding model. Initially, when these 6 cities then said, okay, we have to do this thing, there was a national department, there was a sense that they could fund it, but there was not going to be enough money to fund whatever it was, this thing that was going to support learning and capability and very rapid capacity. So they got money from the EU, the thing we normally do as Africans. We got money from, I think it was USAID, we got money from the EU, I think the Germans put in money. South Africa at that stage obviously was also the blue-eyed child, so everybody wanted to put money into South Africa. So everybody put in money and a kind of a think tank was created. And the purpose of that think tank was to link the practitioners, to link it to scholarship, to link it to global practice. And I think it was quite successful because people learned how to run cities and they learned it quite quickly. Well, for better or for worse, right? What's interesting then, however, in the years that followed, the organization realized within itself, so these mayors and the people who are running the network realized that there was a bit of a problem with the way this organization was funded for the reasons that Erica said. You don't set the agenda if you're being funded by somebody else who also thinks they're setting the agenda. So if you're trying to run your city and you want to have ownership, you want to set the agenda, you want to reaffirm dignity of people, and that's what the project is about, then you can't very well be saying that you're not going to put any money into it and other people must fund what you're doing. So what the organization did systematically, not to discount the importance of help, but they systematically began to withdraw or reduce the proportion of their funding that was external and began to indigenize the funding. They had to get creative because there was no amount of national money when you have another 200 poor municipalities. You as the big ones cannot be saying we want to be the ones funded. So they began contributing, which normally wasn't being done in the South African context. So they began putting money into a pot, contributing between the cities themselves. They called it subscriptions at the time. They've evolved to other language. But they came up with a way of pooling finance among them and within domestic partners to begin funding the organization. So it's got a bit of a complicated funding arrangement, but over time it got to where it was 100% locally funded. Over the last couple of years now, maybe the last 5 years or less, we've now gotten into a situation where we do have partnerships, I would call them real partnerships, with the Germans, with the Americans, or whoever wants to fund us, but that's based on a mutual identification that they're working in an area where we could work together on urban safety, or we could work together on this or that issue. And I think it's a much more equitable form of relation. And I think there was a starting point where the support was important to build an infrastructure, to build a conceptualization of the kind of institution that could do this, that could build capability. But I think that move away from it was important. So I think all of this to say that we've got to think about this quite seriously, because if we maintain a mode that money can only come from elsewhere, there's money in Africa, guys. We may not be rich, but we're not that poor. There are choices people make about allocation of resources. If we can innovate about everything else, then let's innovate also around how we finance things. Let's find appropriate roles for the external support we can get. But I don't think there's any equity in a partnership where one partner thinks that the job of the other is to fund them. That sounds like my relationship with my bank.
I think that was a very useful contribution, but we need to open this discussion to the audience. Because I believe you have some questions which you'd want to either clarify or to seek more, understanding from the panelists. So a few, maybe we start with 3 or 4 questions. I can see a few hands coming up. So I think we pick the first few 5 questions, and then we allow the panelists to respond to those questions. And then we can have another round of questions after that. But remember, we are focusing on a key topic here. We do not want to move out of the topic, innovation and innovation. It's innovation capacity building. This is what we are focusing on in this particular discussion. So make sure that you stick to that topic in a way that, at the end of the day, we should be able to come up with a way forward for this particular team, which is going to be communicated to the organizers of the summit, as well as networks which are interested in building the innovation capacity on innovation in Africa. So please, and be very brief in your and clear in your questions, so that the panelists can address your question. Yeah. So we start from here.
Thank you very much. I have 3 interventions. The first one is from Diron, and he was talking about evolution of innovation studies, particularly within the context of entrepreneurship and other areas. Now, I want you to do something for us, because that will also help us. That has always been the bane around the confusion about innovation. Can you talk a bit about the difference between innovation, improvements, and inventions? That might help us in understanding and clarifying the concept. The other area I want us to also look at is, I like the perspective from which Professor Mahmoud started in looking at innovation systems by giving us some historical perspective about development studies, development theory, but he stopped short of looking at it within the African context.
Yeah.
He was reacting to what has happened, and I was expecting to talk about looking at innovation, looking at it, a historical perspective, and how Africans have reacted, how we are reacting, and how we should react within this development context in being able to develop an innovative African system. With regards to the issue of capacity building, I was quite happy when she looked at it from the perspective of the experiential, the learning aspect, and also the need to have a pool and a system which is conducive to everybody in terms of doing capacity building. But you see, when you look at collaboration and competence, I think that is where some of the problems come up. Sometimes you want to collaborate, you want to interact, but when there is some differences in terms of competencies, you run into certain difficulties. I remember once in 2011, we had a collaboration with a university in South Africa. I don't want to mention that. We spent quite a lot of time trying to define what the agenda was. The university was more interested, the university in South Africa was talking about greening the environment. We were more interested in talking about solid waste management. At the end of the day, we never got up to do anything because we couldn't really agree on what should be done. But because the funding was coming from the South African university, they could pick us out and continue what they were doing. So how do you deal with the issue of agenda? Agenda for me is the main issue. How do we come up with a common agenda on which collaboration and competence can be dealt with? And then finally, I was very happy when you talked about the question of finance. Again, also, one of the major challenges when it comes to finance has always been this question of integrity. Integrity and objectivity. I agree with you very clearly. There's a lot of money in Africa. But the main point is this: what precisely do we want to use the money for? We seem to be driven by this, I don't know whether it's ego or inferiority complex, where Africa seems, or you talk to some people in Africa, they think accumulation has something to do with economic growth. You find some young people, you want to talk to them about doing things right, and the first thing they really want to actually do is to just accumulate money. And then you ask them for what reasons. So these are some of the aspects also. And that brings me to the question of, it is the value system that is affecting our allocation of resources. What really makes up our value system? And how are we going to allocate resources to solve problems in society within a context of innovation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Madam.
Thank you, our dear presenters and speakers. I have some observations on innovation systems, especially on the role of actors. I used to listen to people who studied in these Western countries, and when someone is speaking, he says, when I was in England or when I was in USA, Germany, all these places, and when he is communicating to you, you feel as if when you have studied, if you have studied in Africa, then maybe something is missing. And I'm happy that thing is getting challenged now, because we are having that confidence in the continent, but still something is missing. I feel the role of actors, you need to give more confidence to young people. I'm happy I met the professor in Algeria last year, and I was admiring to see him again. So I'm happy that you are here. And even I saw people were asking him address all the time, because the message is so challenging. You are trying to bring something in people's mind to be confident in ourselves. But how I wish most professors and senior scholars would continue to give this confidence and mentorship to young Africans, so that we think about the innovation system in a new way. Just to cut my story brief. In entrepreneurship, they always have this question: are entrepreneurs born or made? I think I would bring it on innovation. Are innovators made or they are born? If they are made, then we can make entrepreneurs here. If they are born, we all have same equal rights, birth rights. So we should not think of innovations to come from elsewhere. We can start our innovations here. But the pathetic question here is, if our finances are controlled by someone else, and of course the one that controls finance is the one that will guide the direction. So I'm wondering, is there a time when we shall have that control over our resources or over our finances, so that we make appropriate decisions in Africa? Thank you.
Okay, can we have...
Hi everyone, thank you so much for such an informative panel. My question builds on to the gentleman's question regarding power dynamics, especially when it comes to partnerships and collaborations. How have you come across those in your collaboration, and how have you addressed them, and what have been the lessons learned?
Thank you. The last one. Time, please.
Thank you very much. One of the issues often cited in the innovation ecosystem of Africa is the low level of interaction between actors. And interaction could be or can be collaborative or competitive. And some collaborations can be good and some collaborations can be very negative. But we, listening most often, we tend always to sort of discuss more the good things about collaboration. So my question to the panel is, are we not exaggerating the positive effects of collaboration on innovation activities on the continent? Thank you.
I think we receive feedback from the panel for those 5 questions. I think there are more than 5, but more or less related. Maybe instead of going through them, I would ask each of the panelists to pick any of the questions that relate to you or which you think you feel comfortable, addressing. It's starting from Diran and then we come this way. But the issue of finance, I think Gesi can allude to, there were a few issues on, financing, trust, confidence and all that. Yeah, and of course the issues of partnerships, which are very critical. Issues of, do we have, a level playing ground, or, issues of the by trade-offs and all. I think specific issues which you think we can articulate as a panel, because we cannot have answers for all the questions, but at least a few which you think you can shed some clarifications or some light on. So starting from Diran.
All right, thanks, Anne. For the gentleman who asked for some clarification around the concepts of innovation, invention, improvement, and innovation, strictly speaking. Let me answer it broadly before I give you the textbook answer. Is that okay? So that's why we have these programs on innovation studies, because while the innovator may just be passionate about their contraption, their device, and what it can do, and maybe getting rich, those who manage innovation need conceptual clarity about the concepts they use, the activities that are ongoing, and so on and so forth. So this would be sort of like day one of the first course, right? And so just like people train to be doctors and lawyers and whatever, it's important now to train people to be innovation managers. There's a kind of specific knowledge that's emerging and evolving that you need to have some control over. So that's just the broad, so that's a plug for our program, by the way. But strictly speaking, invention is seen as an input into the innovation process. It's early, it's sort of like the words creativity and innovation in natural language are used interchangeably. I'm creative, I'm innovative. It means the same thing if you go to the thesaurus. But in innovation studies, creativity and innovation are not the same thing. Creativity is seen as ideation, the process of coming up with new ideas. But if you have a whole range of new ideas that are wonderful, but only are stuck in your head, or even you share with your friends, but nobody is willing to part with anything to acquire that idea, then that's not innovation yet. If you say, I imagine a plane that flies backwards, that's wonderful. Well, when are you going to do it? You say, okay, I'd actually do it. I've built a plane that flies backward. That's an invention. But if no one finds a backward flying plane useful for anything that they're doing and are not willing to part with a single cent for your wonderful invention, you haven't entered the realm of innovation. You're still stuck really in the ideation phase. Invention is an upgrade from creativity, but it's not innovation yet. Innovation has to have some impact in either the social or the economic sphere. So that's so invention and ideation are inputs. They're part of the innovation process, but they're really at the early stage inputs, whereas innovation is seen as an outcome. Now, when you asked about improvements or continuous improvements. So now, what is an innovation? It has an impact. Is it original in the sense of new to the world, or was it just new to your society, your environment, your country? And then, so that's, those are contested definitions. Some people think if it's not new to the world, then you're just copying or imitating or whatever. In the innovation studies community, especially in the systems tradition, we are more generous. We say, well, even if a technology has been developed elsewhere, the ability to acquire the capabilities to be able to use that, to learn how the technology works, to adapt it, and then to implement it in an organizational setting really is innovation. Even if the balance is non-technological, we do consider it to be an innovation. But at the same time, you can't really say that the one who built a plane and the one who invented the plane and commercialized it and the one who learned how to assemble a plane are innovating at the same level. So, you know, as Americans say, there are levels to this, right? So we have to acknowledge that, in a sense, the one who comes up with new knowledge and is able to diffuse it has a higher set of competences that basically they can commercialize their R&D. So we would call that original innovation, and then more imitative forms we would call secondary innovation. I mean, there are many frameworks, I'm just suggesting one. So in the secondary innovation, which is more imitative, improvements are considered incremental innovation on an existing innovation, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, what are we trying to get at? I think Kalestos Juma, the late Kalestos Juma, wrote in one of his early books in 1989, Innovation and Sovereignty. What is the goal of innovation? And if you go back to Frederick List and others, it's about a nation acquiring competencies, not that they want to invent or innovate everything brand new for the world, but to improve their share of competences so that their engagements with other countries are more equitable, right? So if I invent or innovate 20% original and you invent 20% on something else, and our exchanges are equitable in terms of value. So South Africa, and this will be my last point, in 2016, and this is a metric that's contested, but I like it because it's so striking. It's called the technology balance of payments. So South Africa recorded an 18 billion rand deficit, so let's say $1.8 billion deficit in importing technology, licensing technology, paying royalties on technology relative to the amount that they exported. So it's kind of a striking figure that says the amount that we pay in acquiring technologies that we didn't develop in-house represents a huge cost. Now, if the balance is zero, the deficit is zero, it means, yes, South Africa imports, but they export too. And then at the end of the day, they're part of the global community. So the objective of innovation in our context is to upgrade our capabilities so that we're more self-sufficient than less sufficient, so that our exchanges and collaborations and interactions with other actors are more based on, well, no one can have everything, so I exchange what I don't have for what you do have. But as it stands now, there's a lopsided deficit. So that's sort of a higher order objective. But of course, we have more immediate objectives like water, sanitation. And so solving those problems ourselves, for the most part, is also an objective of innovation, building the competencies to solve our water problem, our energy problem, our agricultural problem. And so that's, I think those are kinds of the concepts, the frameworks that we wrestle with and that we try to communicate to our students, who most of whom will be professionals, but some will be researchers and academics like us, so that they have clarity, so that now the innovator, those who came up with their wonderful inventions, they may not be able to articulate this, but the environment and the system in which they basically emerge tells them what they ought to do, gives them the indicators or the insights or the signals as to what it is that's rewarded, what is it that's not rewarded, and that's basically, we're basically contributing to nation building through innovation.
Erica, make it very brief because we need to make sure we benefit from the audience contribution to this discussion.
So I'll try to be quick and address somehow the three interrelated questions that I think emerged. Thanks for the questions about collaborations. Those are the ones that I'll try to address. So one of them had to do with what do you do when you have partners with different levels of competence and you can't agree on common goals and things like that. And I think despite the acknowledged sort of benefits of collaboration, it's really not an easy task. And yes, you get to situations where collaborations and partnerships are not successful or they fail. And I think from my point of view and my experience, transparency is key from the outset. So if you are able to have transparency in terms of the expected roles, which partners are going to take leadership in different activities. Some partnerships may be there for capacity building, and that is clear. There's no expectations. There are no unrealistic expectations and unrealistic responsibilities. I think transparency is the key word to achieve that. That's not always easy to achieve because some partners in their willingness to attract funding and benefit from being in that project, they may agree to unrealistic responsibilities and roles, and that will come out later in the project and then lead to failure. But those things, I think, they can be resolved from the outset if there is a transparent environment. Then the power dynamics question is also related, and I think, yes, certainly, I mean, power imbalances happen in life and they happen in research collaborations, and I've seen them even within teams. So you see power imbalances in terms of age, in terms of seniority, in terms of gender. You see the voices of some of the partners or some of the participants being silenced in some way or another. And I think it's very important to recognize those and for those partners that are in a more vulnerable position, to know that, to be confident enough to have their ideas taken to another outlet, to another platform where they can be heard. So just my advice is, don't get stuck in a situation where you're paralyzed. Just take your ideas to another forum and have them heard. And then finally, the question about whether collaborations are always beneficial. I agree with you. I think it's important to not be naive about the positive effects of collaboration. I think even when collaborations are not necessarily good, they still have lessons that are very extremely valuable in somebody's career, not only as an individual, but as for units. So I think there are always lessons to be learned, but I think the most important thing is that contractually you have to be well covered in the collaboration. I think it's really important to set up the terms of the agreement clearly and explicitly. Yes, I think I will, maybe I'll stop there.
I think there was an issue on mentorship. Where is mentorship in all these collaborative approaches? Where is mentorship? Nathan raised a very key issue on mentorship, especially of the young innovators. Can we build capacity of the young scholars, young innovators in the process of building their capacity?
Maybe I'll let Prof. Muchi to address that.
I can answer this. We just before I say that, my younger brother, I actually am more lucky than you, because every month for the last 2 years, how are you, my professor? I just get love from all of you. So this keeps me going, and I'm hoping that I'll live 150 years so that I will not die without uniting Africa. No, I won't. So it's because of you, so you are there for me. So I really respect and appreciate and love you all. And I tease you all the time, as you know, and which is good. Now, I think this thing, what you asked, mentorship, we have very practical things we're doing in the university where I am. It's Swanee University of Technology, and I work with the engineers, the industrial engineers, electrical engineers, all the engineering faculty. And what we do is we have set up what we call African Talent Hub. And there was also this African Entrepreneurship Award where I was a mentor. So what we were trying to do was we mentor. What we do is the startup ideas, innovative ideas come from you, from South Africans, from Nigerians, from all over. And where there's about $1 million that is paid, but it's shared. So what we do is all of you get money, seed money, to incubate, to help you to do this. So what we have been doing is, people like us, we get the proposals for the startups, innovation. We discuss with them. We take a long time. Then we get quite a number of them to be accepted. So a lot of them have been funded. Normally they give me, because I am originally from Ethiopia, I get startup, incubating innovators from Ethiopia, and also from South Africa, because I also have become more or less South African now, because I live there. I have been there nearly 10 years teaching there. So what it means is we have been doing this, and now we're thinking of really raising huge money, where we actually really make all our graduates, we want them to be job creators, not job seekers. So in fact, one of my students, I brag about him. His name is Vusi Maleli. He's South African. He wrote a brilliant thesis for me, from my point of view, because he said in the entire universities, all the university of technologies, as they are going now, are not doing the right thing, he says. They should be doing, actually, how students must graduate by the universities supporting them to actually set up startups. That should be part of the, in other words, even the evaluation should be something like that. And he did it by really doing a lot of work on this, and he came up with new ideas and proposals to see if the universities could also take it up. And we're going to work very hard to make sure that his ideas are not just shelved, that actually they could be part of the practice where our university systems can actually really assist our young people. We're working on this very much. Now, you asked me an important question, which is about the innovation system. I am now in a situation where I believe in unthinking to rethink, unlearning to relearn, undesigning to redesign, unscience to rescience, uneconomics to re-economics. The entire innovation system that came from the north is not something we should take. What we should do is we should really look at it, examine it, all right, and contextualize it. And we should develop a new theory on innovation system, what I call the networked innovation system theory, which valorizes Africa's agency and Africa's freedom, Africa's dignity, Africa's innovative capability. All these things are what we want to do. I am just telling you some of the things, the variables. One, the way innovation system or economic growth was thought about in the West is technical plus commercial. No. We in Africa, we're very associational. Our genetic memory is very different, trust me. I mean, we may be now confused, but by taking all these confusions, but we need to clear it up. And we need to think not just economic growth, economic development. We need to see how we capacitate, enable, how people are able to function. We need to create that approach in the way we actually think about innovation. So the innovation to actually create this capacity, competence building, learning, how that can be done in the context of Africa is what we're thinking. The other important thing, very, very important, the way economic growth has been at the expense of nature, at the expense created unemployment, poverty, inequality. We do not want that to happen. We want to change it so that the network economic system actually generates this new approach. These relationships that we want to construct is something we actually do research on. Some of my postdocs are doing research on this, and I am working with them, and we will definitely generate, the next 5 years, if I continue in South Africa, I will make sure that some new things that will make us completely go Nobel Prize type work must be done.
Thank you,
completely new must be done. And I'm going to work with you, and you will do it.
Thank you.
Everything original came from Africa. We need to make original network innovation system for Africa.
Okay, thank you, Mambo. Yes, final points? Because there's one question which I want us to think about, which is very critical for this session. So, final comments on the issues which were raised?
Okay, so I'll be very brief. I think it was largely the ones around finance.
Yes.
And so I think already, as Anna was suggesting, there's some basic issues around, I suppose, why and how one finances things, right? I mean, so I am a fund recipient, but I'm also a funder in my context. And obviously, if I'm funding, there's something I'm funding for, there's a goal. And that goal might be achieving something, might be profit, but there's some objective, there's some purpose to why I'm funding. I also need to have some level of accountability for the funds that I hold, because it's not my own money. And so I don't give money because I want to, or I like to, and I like you, and I want to give you the money. There's an accountability relationship I have around the funding. There's also a confidence issue. So I guess capital, people would call it risk or whatever, but I would probably try to assess the extent to which I think the person can do the thing that I'm requiring within the time frames and whatever rules apply. But those are the things we know. What else is it that applies? I'll give a very quick example, and linked again to my work at Cities Network. It's the easiest thing for me to speak to. We have been trying for a number of years to work a lot more with innovative youth organizations that are working in the policy space. But attempt after attempt, you end up having events and you do things, but we weren't really gaining any mileage, and we were beginning to get concerned that what they would always say to us is just give us the money, and we'll do something. But it was never clear to us. And I began to realize, though, that maybe this is also how Africa is seen out there. You know, people who don't really know what they want to do. We're not sure they really organized these youth organizations. We're not clear about exactly what they're going to do with the money. And so we would continuously have this contestation with them. And our inclination would then be maybe to give them some money, or maybe to give some other third party the money to study them or to help them. But you know, there's always this very paternalistic relationship between us and these youth organizations. So this year, we're experimenting with something different. What we've decided to do is to do a 3-phase process. And my point to all of this is I think we need to experiment with new models. So if we have that problem of accountability, we said let's start with 3 phases. The first phase is where we have a mutual learning experience. So let's give them this information we seem to think they don't have, but let them also tell us what maybe they seem to think we don't understand. Let's learn each other, because then maybe we'll understand each other a bit better. And that's a phase, and it's a funded phase, and it's fine. The second phase is a design phase. Now that we understand each other, what is it that we think, or you think as youth organizations you want to do? We don't drive that process, but we are there as resources if wanted. If we're not wanted in the room, we're not there, but we insist that there be some coherent design phase. And it still may be paternalistic, but at least we're trying to say that we can get to stage 3, where you then tell us, okay, this is what we want you to resource, and this is why, and it does not discount the information and the wisdoms you think you have. But we're also very clear about our objectives, because we're not funding them just because they're youth. We're funding them because they are objectives of the system we're in. And I wonder if maybe that kind of experimentation gets us closer to where this power issue doesn't become us telling people just because they're young that, yeah, maybe we'll fund you, maybe we won't. And I think that's the relationship we're in often as Africa.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we are getting close to our time. I think 5 p.m. We need to finish by 5. But I think I want us to think about. I think most of us have gone through university system, and maybe some of us are actually within the university system, receiving a form of capacity building. I don't know whether our panelists here can mention something about what they see as the role of the universities in building capacity on innovation and development. Because I think we cannot ignore the fact that universities, academic institutions are very critical in building the requisite capacity that we need, particularly for Africa. I know I have some people from the audience who can actually answer that particular question. I can see Julius from Ghana somewhere. I think he can add his voice to this discussion. Yeah, you can give him his mic. I mean, he's here. Give him the mic. If you can briefly, say something about what you see as the role of academic institutions and research institutions in building capacity on innovation and development relevant to Africa, that would be very useful. And I know you also have some other comments you wanted to raise.
Okay, thank you so much. For me, really, when you think of innovation, the first thing we have to do is imagination. Because without imagination, you're not going to have innovation. And if you look at the story of the West, if you think of Isaac Asimov with their robots, if you think of Arthur C. Clarke with their things about satellites, all these things they came from science fiction first. And from there, ideas came and so on. And I think what we lack, even in our universities, is that building that capacity for imagination, that you can build something. And I give a very, very interesting example, because my first degree was in civil engineering. And I remember I had graduated and I had gone to my rural area, and my uncle, they had a committee and they were trying to build a church. A simple structure. But I think I had been taught how to build crazy structures. I think we had done some project on a 30-story building and so on. But nobody had given me the idea of solving simple problems. So we didn't have, so you don't have that imagination, you have capacity. You have the skills to design a big building and so on. But you're not given the capacity to imagine simple solutions to simple problems. And I say, when I started working as an engineer, obviously at the government, one of the most interesting things that I ever did as an engineer was not building the bridges which I was doing, but it's when some local people came and they wanted a footbridge across somewhere, from one reach to another. And they said, we have the money. What we want is somebody to just come and work with us. And I was told, you are the youngest, go and talk with them. And I helped them, we worked with the community. to build a bridge. Just simple, nothing spectacular. But that's when I really felt, yes, this is what we have. And I think this is what lacks in our university system, the capacity to imagine. And what you find in imagination is actually you find it in Juakali, the people you find on the roadside. And I think we did something on, I've done some research on cassava value chain. And you find the cassava value chain has maintained its ability to be competitive. Because you have had a very inventive roadside engineers, people who just think of, okay, people want grating. I can take some used engine and some perforate some plates and do something and do grating. And over time, they have developed interesting machines without help of engineers. And my worry is that we had said, yes, we want to build capacity of informal people. But the problem is that sometimes if you bring formal system, you might actually kill that drive that they have. So how do you build capacity of this informal sector without killing the imagination? Because I think that's what happens with our school system. We build capacity, but we kill imagination. And that's what lacks to me. Thank you.
I think he's opening the discussion, and we have to be ending about 5 o'clock. But he's opening up quite a important discussion here. Building capacity of informal sector, building capacity of our small innovators, small actors who possibly have not even gone to the university. That is the issue that we need to deliberate on, which I don't think we have articulated very well in this session. But I think we need to add. And before we add, I would want to say something about this particular network called AfricaRix, which is trying to address that particular issue that Julius is raising. We are trying to support master's students, a few master's students and a few PhD students to actually think the way Julius is thinking. They could be engineers, they could be agriculturists, but we want them to go beyond what they are doing, what they are passionate about, and ask questions about the relevance of what they are doing. And those questions that Julius is raising actually can only be addressed within a context of innovation studies, where people just go beyond, the traditional capacity building that we receive from academic institutions to ask questions around why and how, which are basically qualitative questions. Perhaps even think about undertaking social science studies around innovation, because that's the only research that can actually answer those questions that Julius is raising. So those are things that we need to think about. So AfricaRix is trying to focus on those issues. And how we do this, we organize for conferences. These are usually annual conferences. We have one coming in Ghana, which is going to bring African scholars to actually deliberate on some of those issues, focusing on the key themes like fourth industrial revolution and emerging innovations in the context of Africa, gender issues and innovation. Those are some of the themes that this particular conference is going to be deliberating on. Although this conference is global in nature, it's going to be in Africa. We are also supporting young scholars who are based at the universities to undertake specialized and targeted studies on the social aspects of innovation. And we are doing this in collaboration with Aalborg University in Denmark, where whoever is a competitive, we announce those grants and you have to apply. It's quite competitive in nature, but you have to be based in Africa to be able to qualify for these grants. We are also trying to provide some basic fund support for mentorship. This is something which we have realized we have to do because mentorship is key in building that targeted capacity building. And a few things here and there, but we do not have enough funds to be able to upscale what we're doing. And the reason why we are discussing the issue of leveraging funds and partnering with other like-minded actors to do this. So that is basically what AfricaRix is doing. We can talk much more about this network after this, but it was important for me to mention what this network is trying to do to address some of those issues that are being raised by Julius, which are quite critical, if we have to focus on capacity building that is pertinent or relevant for Africa. And I think if we do that, if we could look at issues, innovation, capacity building from that simple and basic thinking, changing our mindset, and focusing on the simplicity, imagination, what Julius is talking about here. I think that's the way to go. And we might achieve much more in terms of building that capacity that we actually need, particularly in the context of Africa. So I think we have to end here, unless there's a very burning question that somebody in the audience has. I can see one hand, so we can just allow maybe that one question, because we have to end by 5 o'clock, and we are approaching 5 o'clock. We have that hand behind there. The mic, please.
Thank you very much. Mine is to only raise one point, and I guess it kind of corroborates or resonates with what was said on this side. And it is actually to do with what do universities do? What is it that gets taught at universities? And my sense of it is that there is a kind of a short-circuiting process that happens through the universities, and it is possibly happening because of a connivance between the student and the university system. And what do I say? Why do I say that? I think there is a difficulty that comes when a student enters the university, an adult, and actually assume everything they ever knew ceases to exist and ceases to be knowledge, and the only knowledge they now have to strive to gain is the knowledge that comes from the lecturer. And everything else they came along with ceases to have any meaning. I'm going to relate it in one very quick instance. When I entered the university as an architect to study architecture, even though I was a crafter of everything at home, starting from cutter pens to my father's home, repairing when it is not working, when it is leaking, all that knowledge, my lecturers assumed, park it on the side, and you don't know nothing. Then they start indoctrinating me with whatever it is they thought was an architect need to know. Okay? I go through all that and I become an architect. Just now, the other day, I learned that the business school at the University of Cape Town is teaching design thinking. Business school teaches design thinking. They have got next door a school of architecture. What do architects do? Design thinking. But none of that bridging actually happens. They instead go to Europe and talk to a business school in Europe that started design thinking.
Can you
Architects
conclude?
don't know that they do design thinking. The school in business school doesn't know that the architecture school does design thinking. And there you go. So there is a lot of crisscrossing. There is a lot of lost opportunities.
Yes,
and
yes.
there is a lot of value lost in the process.
Yes,
But
yes. Yeah, I think you are raising quite pertinent issues, and I think this is what Erica alluded to, the need to rethink interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, approach to this subject on capacity building. You are raising very critical issues that we need to think about. Thank you very much for your contribution. Is it going to be very quick? Very quick, it has to be a second.
Actually, I just want to reiterate this issue of interdisciplinary researches. For instance, I work in a research institute, and one of my frustrations has been spending hours on end on a research that at the end of the day just ends in the book and does not touch anybody's life. So if there is a way that it can, it can be, I don't know how you can affect or bring about change in the universities, in research institutes, so that more worthy researches that actually touch people's lives, which just have to be interdisciplinary, can be carried out and funded. That's my contribution.
Thank you. I think there's a workshop tomorrow focusing on those issues that you are raising. You come to the discussion tomorrow. There's a workshop which is going to be focusing on the role of education systems and particularly universities in this kind of approach to innovation, interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity. So I cannot summarize the issues as they came because of time, but I'm going to ask the panel here to just...
1 point.
Mutiny. We have to be given permission by the audience because of time. We are okay. 1 second. It has to be a second.
Thank you very much. Actually, still on that university issue,
but tomorrow
the curriculum within the university that we practice today does not necessarily support innovation. And secondly, the reward system within the university. If you want innovation from the university, then you must reward innovation. So R&D outputs within the university encourage the commercialization of it. That is the way to go for all those universities that we mentioned in the America as well, the MIT. That's what they do. Incentivize R&D commercialization. That's the way to go. From there you see a lot of R&D that will be commercialized.
Thank you, Caleb.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caleb. Yes. Sorry to cut you short, but come tomorrow for this workshop, which is going to be focusing on those issues, particularly issues which are affecting our universities in Africa. Yes. So I want to give just one take-home message, one that you think the audience should take home, just one, and very brief. Tiran, please, very quick, one take-home message for the audience.
One take-home message. I think if you're interested in research and innovation for development, I think there's a lot of information. We need to think through this rigorously. Not everyone does, but those who are interested in research and management should think about it critically. The Africa Links Network and some of the institutions that we're involved with try to provide that grounding and training. A lot of the things that we're talking about have been thought through, so we're not really saying anything new. So be familiar with that and make your own contribution. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Erica?
So my last quick point is the following. So even though universities have a huge weight in terms of knowledge generation in our innovation systems, I think they have to be seen as part of a broader learning system. We have to think about knowledge coming out from higher education and research as complementary to very valuable knowledge that is generated by other actors in the system. And I think, coming back to Julius's point, I think that is where the imagination is triggered, when you interact and create bridges with other actors in society. So I think those partnerships, some of those may work, some of those may not work, but I think the cost of isolation is much higher than the risk of failure.
Thank you. Erica?
Yes.
Mamo?
Yes, Julius, he said imagination and knowledge. I think we need just the following. We need to recapture Africa's indigenous knowledge with imaginative work. The informal economy, some of us are writing books on it. We should really deal with it. How do we do innovation, grassroots and other innovation in that sector? What are the innovations people have or the knowledge they have that we can turn into innovation? We do need to learn how Africans must integrate with each other to deal with and respond to the rest of the world. If they do it now, as they do, separately, we will always lose. So how do we bring ourselves together? We should do that. And I think we need to know how do we link agriculture, manufacture and services, given we have challenges in the global value chain, given we have the fourth industrial revolution, we need to do that. And I think if we do that, how do we also create producers and consumers across Africa? And how do we create the market? how are we intelligent about it, imaginative about it, will be very, very important. I think if we do these variations and create a system of innovation that's networked, that actually includes all aspects, I think we'll be moving onwards and forwards, and I think we'll change the direction of Africa, the journey of Africa, and shape the future of Africa.
Thank you.
Better. And I just want to say before I leave that I like you to read The Thinker. We produce The Thinker. We have another journal, Creativity, Social Innovation, Social Entrepreneurship. In Africa, with our values of Ubuntu, we need social entrepreneurship. We don't need to be individual entrepreneurs. We have to create some new approach like the Germans have done. Social entrepreneurship in Germany is millions. I'm just impressed about Germany. There's a lot we can learn from them. We also have written on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So I like you to read this book on African economic transformation in the digital age. And then we have a journal, which has now been very well recognized, ISS, every Scopus listed. And I should brag because I started it. And now it's really a journal. I like you to publish in these journals. And I think we have another journal. So we have so many journals. Please work on it and publish. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mama.
sorry,
I knew, Mama, you would advertise you. Anyway, Gessi.
Okay, really just 2 points. I think the point I made about let's not be lazy when it comes to the issue of funding. We can mobilize money, let's innovate and be innovative around the issue of financing, and then leverage partnerships so other parties to help fund. So let your function, what you're trying to do, lead what your funding strategy is, and don't be lazy about it. And then the final one was just be vigilant. I think there's nothing neutral about who is funding you.
Okay.
I think you need to be vigilant.
Okay. Just final point from me. These 3 of them are professors. No, 2. 2 are professors and 2 are becoming professors. They are becoming professors. But I want to challenge the 3 of them who are actually based at the universities and ask them, why are they not influencing change of curricula at the university? Because somebody there said, we've been remained rigid and very traditional the way we undertake our capacity building. So the question is, why haven't you changed the curriculum? So that's a question for you to ponder, not to answer, because we have concluded. Yeah, that is true. And the final thing is, they are scientific board members of Africarix Network. So you can see the network is actually receiving very good mentorship. I mean, it's receiving very good advice from renowned scholars on innovation. So I want to thank you, all of you, for accepting to be in this panel. And I believe the audience now have a better understanding about this particular topic that we were discussing today. Let's give them a clap. And let's clap for the audience for being quite engaging. Thank you very much. There's an announcement.
Okay, just to mention that, particularly because this panel mentioned and the room mentioned this point about imagination and the link between imagination. I think Julia said, without imagination, we have no innovation. The next session in this room starts in a few minutes, and it's actually going to be a session of creatives talking about that link between our artists, our dreamers, our creatives, and innovation. So I hope you'll all stay for that. And then I believe there'll be buses leaving after that to the venues, and in the morning we start again at 9. So there will be the session that Anna's referring to on the different, basically the quadruple helix actors and the relationship to innovation. So there will be one specifically on education. There will be others on civil society, private sector, and government. So look forward to seeing you at those tomorrow. Thank you.